I'll start. Okay. Okay. So welcome everyone. This is the Knowledge Lab on From Science to Policy, integrating data for the first effectiveness evaluation, and it's organized by the open-ended scientific group that's established under the convention, which is co-chaired by Dominique from Bali, from Côte d'Ivoire, as well as Sandy Stephan from Canada. Today, this will be a very interactive session, as the knowledge labs are aimed to be, some presentations, but an opportunity to dialogue. My name is Brenda Kukuk. I just joined the Minamata Secretariat in February this year. So I was a former Mercury Minamata person back when the convention was negotiated many years ago and led the Global Mercury Partnership. So at that time, so I know many of you, and it's a pleasure to see many familiar faces from that time. And also a pleasure to join in a new capacity here in the Secretariat. I've spent the last number of years working on various pollution issues at UNEP, from SciCam to plastics pollution, etc. So just have brought a new experience back here to the Minamata Secretariat. Enough about me. I really feel that this effectiveness evaluation is the first one for Minamata, so it's an important one. We have two very important committees that are helping to deliver on this, and there's high expectations on these committees to actually deliver the effectiveness evaluation by COP-7. And COP-7 also coincides with the 10th anniversary of the entry into force of the convention. So I think it'll be a very interesting and timely opportunity to really celebrate, the 10 years and move forward that way. So what's really important also is just to note that, the data and information generated through various committees, through national focal points, through NGOs, all of that data has to somehow find its way into our effectiveness evaluation report. And that's part of the process that we're moving forward here on. And I look forward to your dialogue today. I won't be able to join the whole time. I will be here for a period of it, but I am coordinating on behalf of the Secretariat, the Effectiveness Evaluation Group with Lynn Roy and Katka, and Isaku Toda is with a contact group right now, so he is not able to join either, but he is coordinating the science group. And we're here to serve you and help you. We are trying to informally record this for those of us who have committee members that maybe weren't able to join the COP. So we have a strange setup here on the panel to have this, so bear with us. But thank you so much for being here. And I thank you to our co-chairs, and I pass it over to you, Lenoy, to get started.
I don't need to switch.
I think you need to switch.
And you can stay there, and I will just speak from here, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry. Hot seat.
Share the slides, right?
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous angle.
Screen off. At least, yeah. All right. Okay, colleagues. So, as Brenda said, the EEG group, of course, was established under the COP to conduct this first effectiveness evaluation, looking both at the scientific aspects as well as the economic, financial, technical aspects. So just this brief presentation will be just to refresh everyone as to the process. So Lenoy Christian, I'm the co-chair along with Katka, Katarzyna Sebkova from the Czech Republic. And just to give you a very brief overview, because I think there are far more interesting presentations here today on modeling, and Dominique from the OESG, they've had quite a bit of work that is quite interesting. and I think everyone is eager to hear about. So just reminding you of Article 22 on the effectiveness evaluation and how this will be facilitated. And within the OES, within the effectiveness evaluation, the key aspect would be these 36 indicators that were negotiated at COP-5. And within those 36 indicators, 2 are being evaluated by the OESG, indicators 1 and 29, and the other 34 will be assessed by the effectiveness evaluation group. So this is well underway, and I think you'll hear about the what goes on within the OESG, but we'll just give you a flavor of what is happening within the effectiveness evaluation group. And we had one change within the effectiveness group. So the previous co-chair, Itsuki Kuroda, she has been reassigned. We appreciated, of course, the government of Japan, and we have a new member, Koki, who has joined our effectiveness group, and we've met 7 times in the past year, all virtually, and we have 2 face-to-face meetings planned next year. And on the OESG side, of course, Dom and Terry had started, but Sandy has taken over for Terry in the last few months, and you'll hear a bit more about what goes on within the OESG in a bit. So within the effectiveness evaluation group, we would have established these subgroups to ensure that we tackle these indicators in a systematic fashion. So we did a bit of grouping, and each subgroup has a subgroup lead, as you'll see on my left, your right. The member from Argentina, she would have left us recently, so we have a subgroup lead that we'll have to replace. And Katka has graciously decided to look at 2 subgroups in particular, which would be D and E, and each of the subgroups will conduct an evaluation, and that will be compiled into the larger report. Subgroup F, which is headed by the co-chairs, would have developed the annotated outline, which you see now as INF 22, and also the draft methodology as to how the effectiveness evaluation report will be. So let me just turn over to Katka to go through a bit of the process as to how the subgroups are conducting their work. Katka?
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I think it's okay.
Yeah.
So regarding the process, as you heard from Linroy, we have a number of major work ahead of us because we will have face-to-face meetings only coming up next year, starting January. And of course, we are also waiting for one of the key pillars, which is the report from the OESG, and which is still in the making, and we are going to see a sneak peek from you and your approaches and your challenges that you are dealing with. So we look forward to see that. And then once we have it, in our January meeting, we would be really working on the information and its analysis and comparison against individual indicators. And we would be really describing not only the findings and potential trends where there are any, but also description of gaps. And we would like also to use the opportunity of the first effectiveness evaluation to test whether we have prepared the framework right and whether we have we need to do some adjustments. But other than that, we of course have the guiding questions that were put forward already in the framework and which you can see on the screen. And then we are also looking at some questions that are raised during our meetings online. And I think that for this, the effectiveness evaluation group, Task F, prepared a methodology that we are still discussing, and we are trying to develop our report in a way so that it would be comprehensible to people who are not deeply involved in the task, but who would understand it would have similar structure. And as Linroy said, that report on our work and also suggestion for the structure of the effectiveness evaluation group report has been submitted as INF 22. If we can move a bit further, Linroy, I would like to show you just timeline, I think on the next slide, because I have already said that. So this is the timeline of the work. The effectiveness evaluation group will complete its work at the COP, or before the COP 20, not 27, before the COP 7 in 2027. And that's when you will see the main product of the work. And I think if you go to the next slide, that really describes what Lynn Roy said, that we had 7 meetings so far from the establishment of our group. And these in the boxes, you see the main events that are basically happening now. And the next slide shows also a timeline and different meetings in different settings. What I would like also to mention, to draw your attention, I mean, you have seen it probably on the screen today or from the bureau meeting, that the effectiveness evaluation item on the agenda will come up later on today, or depending on the progress, may be continuing also tomorrow. But also would like to alert you that you will hear more about effectiveness evaluation in the plenary. So over to you, Lynn Roy, if there's anything else you would like to add. Thank you.
No, thank you, Katka, and that's I think you've provided the main aspects here. Just one other thing, apart from the report of the OESG, the second full national report, which comes out in December of this year, will also form part of what we would have to analyze. And as you could see later in 2026, we would hope to add that initial analysis and to finalize in December the final analysis of that to produce the report in later in 2026. So the groups, all of the subgroups, should be providing their feedback by the end of this month, and that will be compiled to form the first input to the meeting, the face-to-face meeting in January of next year. And then we start to develop the report in detail, starting in that first face-to-face meeting. So that's it for us. Thank you very much, Katka. And I think at this point we would turn over to Dominique to provide an overview of the OESG. Thank you
so much, Lynn Roy. Sit for minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Stop this sharing. Stop the sharing. Yeah. Thank you. So, good afternoon, all of you, and thank you so much again for making time to be here with us. I would like to acknowledge all the work done by all the scientists here, and thank you on behalf of my co-chair Sandy, who is not there, but so who is still supportive of this work. Thank you all for the tremendous work that we have been doing together. And as you know, the OSG Open-Ended Science Group on Effectiveness Evaluation has been established since COP4 by the decision MC4/11, with the clear mandate to produce a scientific report that will guide the Effectiveness Evaluation Group at the beginning of its work. So to do that work, if each country is nominated different experts to be part of this OSG, and also we had some observers also which have been nominated by parties to be part of this OSG, and we have been composing also a roster of experts. So to date, we have 42 OSG members and 112 experts in the roster of experts that have been working together to achieve what we have been able to do so far. And this work was done in 7 teams, especially the one leading by on air, on biota, on other media, on humans, leads and emissions and release. And we had another one on integrated analysis, and the last one on the future vision. All of this work was coordinated by the Secretariat and both co-chairs that we were, especially Terry Keating from the United States, replaced now by Sandy Stephen from Canada. So this work, our work consisted in doing what especially? We, as the OSG, we had the mandate to answer some of the policy questions agreed since the COP3. So these policy questions were related to especially identify and observe the different changes in the changes level of mercury in the environment, especially in the biota, in vulnerable human populations that could be attributed to the Minamata Convention especially. Additionally, we had two other policy questions that were also a matter for us to respond, especially identifying the different gaps in knowledge and the capabilities and even barriers to answer these policy questions. And finally, the last question was to discuss about the action that could be taken to address these gaps and barriers, which will be responded by the effectiveness evaluation group. So based on that, we gathered different data, especially on the different matrices in air, in emissions and release, in abiotic matrices, in biota and human biomonitoring. These data that were gathered, assisted in, were stored in the cloud, especially, and with the assistance of Biodiversity Research Institute, we created that repository for data where the statistical analysis started. We made a multimedia global modeling comparison that we'll be talking soon, and another multimedia limited case studies for regions and matrices where there was a lack of data. So to date, we have been able to produce a data availability report, so which has been submitted to parties for review. And based on that, on the different comments that we received, we improved this report. Currently, we are finalizing the scientific report because we have our data analysis report already ready. But the scientific report, based on the different answers on the policy questions each team had to respond, has been prepared. We are almost at, I can say today, 90%, and we expect to have this final report end of this month, at least submitted to the parties for review, and hopefully, based on the feedback of the different parties, this report will be submitted to you early next year so that you can start your work. This is the current status of the OSG work, and we are still there to continue to support the EAG group. And this is an opportunity also for me to thank all the members of the OSG, all the roster of experts, and even the tremendous work done by the Secretariat to support this work. Thank you so much.
So I think now we
hand over to the different presenters.
That's one. Do I have to do something with sharing?
No.
First, open the slide.
Okay.
You can sit here as you know. Then yeah. Sit here. Sure.
Perfect. Yeah. Great. So hi, everyone. So my name is Ari Feinberg, and here today with Johannes Bieser and Hélène Ngo, we're going to be talking about the MCHgMAP project, which was part of the integrated analysis group as part of the OESG report. So there we go. So the MCHgMAP project, which stands for the Multi-Compartment Mercury Modeling and Analysis Project, the idea here was to apply several different types of models together to assess the spatial trends and as well as the temporal trends in mercury pollution. And the idea here was to design experiments that would be helpful for informing especially the effectiveness evaluation of the Minamata Convention. Our approach was to combine atmospheric models, ocean models, land models, and as well multimedia mass balance models for a coordinated simulation of the mercury cycle. And so we integrated these models together as also with emissions data and monitoring data to come up with a kind of holistic look at the at the Mercury problem. And so we published a design paper, which is out now in Geoscientific Model Development, in case you're interested in learning more. And I should say that we're part of a much bigger team, which was led by Ashu Dastur from Environment and Climate Change Canada. And so the project overall involves 4 atmospheric models, 2 ocean modeling teams, and then as well these other modeling teams and people working on emissions and measurements. So today I'll be talking about the atmospheric models. And so we had 4 different atmospheric mercury models as part of this project. And the way that these models work is they take as input emissions data and meteorological data, and they include parametrizations to capture the recycling of mercury at the Earth's surface. And what this animation is showing is it gives you an idea of what's coming out of these models. So you have a horizontal gridding where you split the world up into grid boxes. And so this is showing just the surface air concentrations of elemental mercury. But we actually simulate this for the whole atmosphere. And what you can see is that the areas with high emissions show up as yellow, and then you see these plumes transported along with the weather patterns, and eventually you have deposition of this mercury. So we simulate different years in our models, and then we can compare this with available data from measurements shown here on the right. And these are sites provided by monitoring networks globally. And so without their work, this modeling exercise would be impossible. But the idea here is that the models can both fill in gaps where we don't have measurements, so we can learn information about the mercury cycle where we haven't yet measured. And as well, the models are a useful tool for integrating our current understanding of mercury sources and cycling. And then we can use these models to then test this understanding when comparing with observations. So as part of this project, we've produced new emissions inventories, and as well, we've compared these updated inventories with the assessments from the GMA, the Global Mercury Assessment, and we find overall that there's a consistent prediction in the total levels of mercury emissions. However, we do have an updated source distribution in our project. And we've compared the modeling results with observations. So here is shown the models which were simulated between 2010 and 2020, and averaged here the 4 atmospheric models averaged to give an ensemble mean. And so on the left, what you can see is in the background is showing the models, and the circles, the filled circles, are showing the results from the measurement networks. So overall, we're satisfied with the comparison of the gradients in mercury that we see in the observation compared to what we're able to simulate with the models. However, I should say that these orange circled areas represent huge areas, especially in the tropics and in the southern hemisphere, where we don't have enough information from observations currently. And so right now the models are performing quite well compared to the available observations. However, we want to highlight that we need to improve the observational coverage in specific regions to give us a better idea of the local mercury cycling there. So another novel aspect that we looked at in this project compared to the global mercury assessment was to apply the atmospheric model ensemble for the first time to study mercury trends. And so we looked at this period between 2010 and 2020, the period when the Minamata Convention was signed and started to be implemented. And our interest was seeing whether this policy changes had any impact on the measurements. And so on the left-hand side, it shows the measurements from the northern hemisphere. The observations are shown in black, with the gray being the means. And so you can see the observations have shown a decline in the atmospheric mercury concentrations across the northern hemisphere. Whereas if we look at the model simulation, so this is the red and the yellow lines. These are the model simulations with the base inventory we used based on the EDGAR emissions inventory, and we're not able to capture the decreasing trend in mercury concentrations. However, when we scale the anthropogenic emissions to produce a decline in the anthropogenic emissions, we're able to capture then that trend. And we've done many other simulations and analysis to look at whether natural variability, for example, weather patterns or changes in vegetation, could have contributed to the trend during this time period. And we find that the most convincing explanation is the anthropogenic emissions. I see a question. Yeah.
Just for clarification, because this isn't my field of expertise, what do you do with the data when you scale the emissions?
So we take the... Yes, sure. So the question is what we do with the data when we scale the emissions. So this is the EDGAR emissions inventory, and what is done is we scale the spatial pattern downwards. So we've done multiple different simulations testing with different scaling patterns for different regions. But the idea is that the spatial distribution in the emissions stays the same, but we scale the annual totals to get a different trend in the emissions. And this is highly idealized because we can't say anything about source attribution at this stage right now with the data we have. And so this was the idea here, was to test, okay, we see this declining trend in the observations. What kind of emissions decline would we need to explain this observed trend? That's sort of what we were getting at. And then for the southern hemisphere, what we see is that the observations show a slight increasing trend. Although I should mention that there's very few sites here to represent the whole southern hemisphere. There's only around 5 sites for this period. So our analysis of these trends and the causes of these trends right now is limited. However, just to summarize again, so for the northern hemisphere, what we're seeing is a decline in the observed atmospheric elemental mercury, which we best explain when anthropogenic emission by a decrease in anthropogenic emissions, which suggests that the Minamata Convention is showing early success at mitigating the emissions of mercury. And so I'll pass it over to Johannes, who will talk about the modeling in the ocean.
Thank you, Ari. One real step forward in this exercise is the multi-compartment aspect. Previous studies like done for the global mercury assessments, they were solely based on atmospheric modeling. And here in this case, we now actually used fully resolved hydrodynamic ocean models to model the mercury cycling in the ocean. Here, just as an example, I show the general ocean circulation patterns from an ocean model. And then we have 2 ocean models, the MCHgMAP and the ICANO, so we can build a model ensemble like we do it for the atmosphere. Although right now we only have 2 models, not 4 we can use. What we're doing with the oceans is that we have basically 2 major inputs there. The one is the mercury that comes from the land side, mostly via rivers or coastal erosion. And we get the deposition fields from the atmospheric models, and we dynamically calculate the exchange of the elemental mercury between the ocean and the atmosphere. What we did is we implemented the complex mercury chemistry into the ocean models, and that also includes the methylation of mercury to mono and dimethyl mercury species. And these models, they also contain highly complex nutrient and ecosystem models. So ultimately, indicated by the little fish here, we will actually be able to also model the bioaccumulation of methyl mercury in marine biota. And a first step, because this is a first for us, is of course to evaluate how good are the models and can we trust them? Are they actually valid tools? And for this purpose, a big part of the work was actually gathering observations of individual mercury species in the oceans. And as you can see, on the one hand, there is quite some coverage, and on first glance, that looks really nice. But of course, you have to note that unlike a dot on land that represents a monitoring site that might measure every 5 minutes, every day of the year, these are just single cruises from experimental cruises from science ships. So a line with many dots, that's one ship driving there once in a lifetime. And so basically you can see we have huge areas where never ever any ship was going, and then even where ships have been, the data is quite scattered, and it just represents this one instance. And so that's actually a big issue. On the one hand, we of course need more observations, but we will never be able to get a complete picture from the observations, and that's why we really need the models here. And so as a first step, here I just plotted the model is actually the annual average. The dots represent individual cruises, and that's also explains why there is quite some mismatch between a single day and this average field. But if we actually look at this distribution, and here just an example for the total mercury and the elemental mercury, and what I've plotted here is basically on the left we have the South Pole, on the right we have the North Pole, and then you see the North-South gradient. And you can see in the observations that there is quite some variability, and we see that this is mostly connected to upwelling patterns, deeper mercury from the deeper ocean coming up, and also there's this high variability in the polar regions. But in general, our models are able to reproduce the magnitude of mercury, the different abundance of different species and these patterns. So we're actually quite positive with these first results and think the models are valid tools to evaluate mercury in the ocean. And our results are still the first preliminary results. So the bioaccumulation modeling itself is something where we will only get the results in the coming year. But so far, what we see in the ocean model is that over the study period from 2010 to 2020, it looks like the mercury in the ocean has been quite stable. So it's not getting worse, it's not getting better. It seems that the amount of methylmercury in this period has been quite stable, and that also fits to what we've been seeing in the biota data so far. And all these data from these highly resolved atmospheric and ocean models, we then take and we give them to our colleagues with the box models. And with that, I'll hand over to my colleague, Helene.
So in high resolution models, the host is divided into many small cells. These cells capture detailed processes at the regional scales, but these models are quite computationally expensive and hard to run over long time scales. The box model, however, represents the planet in a much simpler way. So we do lose spatial details. We no longer know what happens in specific regions of the world, but we do keep the big picture and how the main reservoirs interact. More specifically, in our case, the box model couples the atmosphere, the ocean, and soils. And it is designed to do long-term simulations over centuries to millennia, which allows us to explore how mercury cycles through these reservoirs and how it responds to changes in emissions. So to understand the present day mercury in the environment, we need to know where this mercury comes from. In the box model, we're able to distinguish between two main sources. The first one, primary emissions. So this are direct releases from human activities, such as coal burning or industrial processes. Then we have secondary emissions, also called legacy mercury. So this is the mercury that was emitted in the past, deposited to soils and oceans, and is now being re-emitted back to the atmosphere. And our box model allows us to quantify how much of today's mercury comes from current human activities and how much is recycled from this long-term legacy pool. So this figure shows the global mercury budget we get from running the box model, and we see the main reservoirs and the fluxes between the different reservoirs. So what is striking here is that most of the mercury in the atmosphere is not newly emitted, it is recycled. So our box model results show that about 70% of global emissions each year come from this legacy mercury pool. And in comparison, current human activities account for only about 25% of total emissions. So even if we cut new emissions today, the legacy mercury already in the environment will continue to cycle and to influence environmental levels for decades to centuries. And so that leads me to this main conclusion. So these results highlight that why we need to cut emissions now. Only a rapid and sustained reduction in new mercury releases can slow down and eventually reverse the buildup of legacy mercury in the environment. And because the system has such a long memory, the sooner we act, the sooner the recovery begins. And so with that, we're happy to open the floor to comments or questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I think we have just about 15 minutes, I believe, for questions. So the floor is open to any questions.
There's a question.
So much, hi everyone. So the last what we started talking where mercury come from. Is it a call also transparency about the trade of mercury, additional to the legacy? Because I think the effectiveness evaluation will not be really implemented if we still have like this non-transparent like trade of mercury. Thank you.
Hard button question. I don't see any takers for the answers. Anyone?
I mean, I could say at least that the trade of mercury is definitely a challenge. When we think in these type of models, we think of what enters in the end the global cycle of mercury. And so, I mean, the mercury that's traded, some part of it eventually gets into the environment and some part will eventually get into the global cycle. And if you can think about it, I mean, at each step you have more and more uncertainty of if it's trade, and especially if it's illicit trade, you don't know how much of it is, and then the next step of how much is going to be released, and then the next step of and of what's released, what stays local versus what goes globally. So I agree that that's one of the biggest challenges in understanding the global cycle right now.
Thank you.
Luis Fernandez, Wake Forest. Given the data gaps in the open ocean, how feasible is it that the models will be able to constrain the values, given that cruises are not easy to come by, they're expensive, and particularly for the biota models? I mean, the ocean chemistry potentially could be, because there's probably not very much variance, but in terms of how it's going to be related to cetacean, methylmercury levels, and others, what's your feeling about how good are we going to get those models and in what timescale?
I mean, it's a can of worms. It really starts that the biggest gap is already the step from the inorganic to the methylmercury, because we still don't understand how that is formed exactly. And so the monomethylmercury concentration is already a big question mark. In the food web itself, we actually have the thing that, for example, a fish that moves over a big area, it's averaging out again. So personally, I say it's more difficult modeling the methylmercury concentrations than actually the bioaccumulation. But it's something that we've just been started, and I cannot really truthfully answer this question. We will see that over the coming year.
Well, quite interesting, but I have a few questions about the bioaccumulation. So how did you treat in your model the reference trophic level? So because at the end, all this exercise should be used at a certain point to estimate the impact on human health. So somehow we have to link the emission, deposition, cycling, and then impact on human health through the food chain. So how did you treat this in the bioaccumulation model of this?
So we do track the trophic level in our models. Trophic level basically is a variable, so we can confirm because, I mean, just because we call the variable fish, it doesn't really become a fish. So we can actually compare what is the trophic level of our model fish to the trophic level of the real fish, and that's how we can attribute it. Typically, what we're doing right now is that we are looking at one target species, and we say, okay, we now model this fish. So we then actually tune the fish to have the right trophic level for this species. And we would typically look what is the age that is reported in the observations. So we would then normalize the fish in the model to be of that age. But so basically, depending right now, the way it works is that depending on you want to know what's in tuna, what's in cod, we would actually set up the model specifically for one species.
So did you compare your modeling output with the FAO data sets that
No, as I said, so far we are only at a step where we evaluated the mercury in the ocean. The bioaccumulation, it's still work to be done. So it's in the models now, but the evaluation is still outstanding.
Yeah, then one question. You showed the slide, the 70%, 25% was missing 5%. What was about?
Natural emissions.
Thank you. And let's use the microphone now. My name is Lotte van Leeuwen. I'm from the Netherlands. And I'm wondering if you look at this modeling, and you've got quite a plan ahead. And I think that it also, the models at this time have quite some uncertainties with them. What does that mean in terms of recommendations for the effectiveness evaluation? Will that be more on a quantitative scale or more on a qualitative scale? Because the 25-70% seems quite quantitative, but I can imagine that further advice may be more qualitative in nature. So I was looking for reflection on that. Thank you.
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think as modelers, we always have to think of the uncertainty. And one of the first things that how we're trying to tackle this here is that we have 4 different atmospheric models. So we can see, okay, people use different parameterizations. We get some part of the idea there. But I would say also we're limited in a way with the data that we have. So for this trends question, for example, we think that the evidence right now points to that the decline in mercury concentrations in the Northern Hemisphere is due to a decrease in anthropogenic emissions. But at this stage of where we have monitoring stations and how long they've been measuring, it's difficult to attribute it to source and to region specifically. And so I would say that, yeah, we're limited by the data that we have, but these models give us a tool to kind of integrate the other measurements that are available to test hypotheses and move forward in that way.
And there's also one nuance I'd like to add is that it gets easier to say something is decreasing by 10% or increasing by 10% and to say it's increasing by 100 tons. So relative changes are much more robust than the absolute values.
Can I have one question? You showed a slide with a few hot spots in the tropics. That more or less is where the artisanal small scale gold mining are. Did you evaluate the scale of the impact from geographical point of view of this SGM area? So how much travel the emission from SGM and what is the impact area?
Yeah, so that's one of the open questions is that we're missing monitoring data specifically in that regions where people say that that's the most important source of mercury to the atmosphere. In our models, we can see we've done some kind of source attribution to see if we can turn off or we can keep certain sources constant, and then see what would be the trend if we only have the ASGM sources varying. So we can see how that signal propagates on a global scale. So we have looked at that a bit. Mostly, I mean, you see the biggest signal close to the emission sites, but you do have hemispheric transport of this signal as well. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Carl. I will take Dave, and then we have plenary, so I think we have to stop now. So we'll take one final question, and then.
Good. David Evers from Biodiversity Research Institute, and it's interesting to see the mercury concentrations, but that's obviously just part of the story. It's the methylation abilities, right? And so high mercury concentrations don't mean too much in a system that doesn't have a lot of methylating abilities, where low mercury concentrations in high methylating conditions is everything. So you're working on those sort of models too, to better understand the sensitivity of the systems, both on the landscape and in the oceanscape?
I mean, from the ocean model side, we currently really lack a process understanding. So what's the current state of the art is that we say, because I mean, we think it's happening in anoxic conditions, but we see it happening everywhere. So we say, okay, there's microenvironments. And so typically what we do is in the ecosystem models, we have the remineralization rates. And then we take this remineralization as a proxy to say, okay, that's biomicrobic activity. There might be localized anoxia, but honestly, we really lack a good process to implement. We're not able to get these difference and say this is a high methylating, this is a low methylating environment, because just the process understanding is lacking there.
Okay, so thank you very much, colleagues. I think we have to wrap up. I'd like to thank Katja and our presenters and Dominique from the OESG.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. So just thanking everyone. I know we have plenary now. It's just so very interesting presentations, great questions. And we look forward to the scientific report. And best of luck to our colleagues in the OESG in their deliberations. And thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Methylation and everything.
Yeah, they read something else. I mean, of course,
It's what really affects us.
Yes.
Yeah, and the colleagues from the